In 2012, under the dazzling lights of the Summer Olympics in London, a young Puerto Rican boxer named Felix Verdejo Sanchez rose to global prominence. His talent was undeniable, his ambition unwavering. Puerto Rico saw him as a diamond in the ring, a prodigy destined for greatness. The press dubbed him the future of boxing, and pundits predicted world titles, gold medals, and international acclaim. In every corner of the boxing world, there was a sense that this young man would become a legend. But nearly a decade later, his name would return to the headlines, not for his athletic achievements, but for a chilling crime that stunned the public. By 2021, Verdejo's name wasn't filling sports pages. It was splashed across crime reports. What began as a teenage romance had spiraled into a dark obsession, culminating in a horrifying tragedy. The man who delivered the most electrifying knockout of 2014, praised by none other than Olympic champion Vasily Lomachenko, was now facing life behind bars. Even more disturbingly, despite overwhelming evidence and testimony from an accomplice, Felix Verdejo continued to deny any wrongdoing. It was a fall from grace that shocked even the most hardened boxing fans. Felix was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, on May 19, 1993. Raised in a large but humble family, he was a passionate and energetic child with dreams of becoming a baseball player. But fate had other plans. At 9 years old, an incident changed the course of his life forever. A neighborhood scuffle with a friend led to his father suggesting that if he wanted to fight, he should do it properly, with gloves in a ring. It was a remark made in passing, but it ignited something in the boy. Shortly afterward, he was taken to a local boxing gym. From the very first training session, Felix was hooked. He had found his purpose. At just 16, Verdejo won the Pan American Junior Championships. A year later, he was crowned national champion. By 2012, he was representing Puerto Rico on the world stage at the London Olympics, reaching the quarterfinals and earning praise for his technical brilliance. That same year, he launched his professional career. Over time, he racked up 27 victories in 29 fights, a nearly spotless record. His 2014 knockout of Sergio Villanueva was declared the year's best. The following year, he clinched his first title, the WBO Latino lightweight belt, which he defended 6 times. Spectators and analysts alike believed he was destined for boxing immortality. But outside the ring, a more complicated story was unfolding. In November 1993, just months after Felix was born, a girl named KEISHLA Marlon Rodriguez Ortiz entered the world in the same city of San Juan. She was raised by her parents, Jose and Kayla Rodriguez, alongside her sister Beriliz and half-brother Jonathan. KEISHLA was a kind and outgoing young woman who excelled in school and adored animals. Her childhood dream was to become a veterinarian. Her bond with her sister was strong. They confided in each other, trusted one another implicitly. Felix and KEISHLA had known each other since childhood, attending the same school. As teenagers, their friendship blossomed into something deeper, a romantic connection. In 2011, KEISHLA's parents divorced, and while her mother moved to Florida, KEISHLA and her sister stayed behind in San Juan. They were both young adults by then, building their own lives, but their sibling connection remained unbreakable. Meanwhile, Felix's star continued to rise, and so did his temptations. At 18, he began seeing a younger girl named Eliza Maria Santiago Sierra, an aspiring model who was only 14 years old at the time. Eliza's parents, surprisingly, approved of the relationship. They saw in Felix a young man with fame, fortune, and promise. Over time, the relationship deepened. Eliza envisioned a future filled with lights, cameras, and wedding bells. She was confident she was the only woman in Felix's life. But she wasn't. Despite his commitment to Eliza, Felix continued seeing KEISHLA. His affections were scattered, his loyalties torn. Those close to KEISHLA, her mother and sister, were wary of the relationship. They knew about Eliza, and they didn't approve of Felix's duplicity. But KEISHLA, still in love and emotionally tethered, found it difficult to walk away. He had been her first love, and in some quiet part of her heart, she still believed he might one day choose her. In 2016, Felix married Eliza. By then, She was nearly 19 and had made a name for herself as a rising social media personality and successful model. She had cultivated a large following online, presenting the image of a glamorous couple living a dream. Yet beneath the surface, the illusion was cracking. As Felix stepped deeper into the spotlight, the pressure mounted. Not just in the ring, but in his personal life. The weight of fame, expectations, and hidden affairs became a volatile mix. Those closest to him often turned a blind eye, either enamored by his success or unwilling to confront the darker truths. But KEISHLA saw both sides of Felix, the charming athlete the world adored, and the flawed young man who kept her hanging on with promises he never intended to keep. The love triangle between Felix, KEISHLA, and Eliza was not just a matter of broken hearts. It was a slow-burning fuse leading to devastation. Eliza, believing she was building a future with the boxer, was unaware of just how deep his ties to KEISHLA remained. And KEISHLA, believing she was still loved, struggled to reconcile the warmth of their memories with the coldness of his betrayals. Each woman, in her own way, was trapped in Felix's orbit. The years following Felix's wedding to Eliza were filled with tension and secrets. KEISHLA never completely disappeared from his life, and the emotions between them never fully died. The boxer, caught between the image he projected to the public and the reality of his private indiscretions, was spiraling. Something had to give, and it would, in the most tragic and violent way imaginable. The seeds of heartbreak and deception had been sown for years. Now, the consequences were about to erupt. In August, just months after his wedding, Eliza opened her own beauty studio specializing in eyelash extensions. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But behind closed doors, the cracks in their marriage were growing. That same year, Felix was involved in a serious motorcycle accident. He had been speeding, reckless, and ended up in the hospital with head trauma, severe bruising, and multiple lacerations. His longtime trainer, Ricky Marquez, feared that this might be the turning point, where the rising star would lose himself completely. Yet, against the odds, Felix made a rapid recovery and returned to boxing shortly afterward, defying medical expectations. In September 2019, Felix posted a photo online showing Eliza in the late stages of pregnancy. The caption read, "Soon I will meet my daddy's princess." A month later, he proudly announced the birth of their daughter, Miranda Verdejo Santiago. Publicly, he played the role of the devoted husband and doting father. But privately, he was still deeply entangled with KEISHLA. Their relationship, painful and secretive, continued behind Eliza's back. KEISHLA had tried multiple times to end things, but Felix wouldn't let her go. He threatened her, warned her not to see other men, and tightened his emotional grip on her. Despite everything, KEISHLA still loved him. While Felix presented the image of a perfect family man, KEISHLA quietly built a life of her own. She found work at a veterinary medicine and aesthetics center, a role that allowed her to follow her dream of caring for animals. Her co-workers described her as diligent, kind, and deeply dedicated. She lived with her beloved pets, 2 dogs and a cat, who meant the world to her, but she carried a burden in her heart. Even though years had passed, her feelings for Felix had not faded. She held on to the hope that one day he might choose her, not as a secret but as someone to build a life with. In 2020, Eliza discovered messages between her husband and multiple women, including KEISHLA. Enraged, she threw Felix out and threatened him with divorce and restricted access to their daughter. The shock temporarily jolted him into compliance. For a brief time, he cut off communication with KEISHLA. But even in silence, he tried to keep control, monitoring her, manipulating her. Eventually, they resumed secret visits. By April 2021, KEISHLA discovered she was pregnant. A drugstore test confirmed it. She confided first in her sister, Liz, who had long known about the toxic relationship and feared for her safety. KEISHLA was 27 and emotionally ready for motherhood. Abortion was never an option in her mind. A few days after confirming the pregnancy, she told Felix. But instead of support, she was met with rage. He told her in no uncertain terms that the pregnancy had to end. He was furious, terrified that the revelation of an illegitimate child would ruin his image and career. But KEISHLA stood her ground. She wasn't going to terminate her pregnancy. Her conviction only infuriated Felix further. He then pretended disbelief and asked to see the medical certificate himself. He proposed they meet in person that evening in a public location. Behind the scenes, Felix was orchestrating something far darker. He reached out to an old acquaintance, Luis Antonio Cudis, a mechanic with known criminal ties and a history of drug dealing. Felix explained his situation and asked for help eliminating KEISHLA. Luis, though wary of the legal consequences, was persuaded by Felix's promises, assurances of a smooth operation, secrecy, and a large sum of money. The plan was set in motion. Felix then called KEISHLA and asked her to meet on April 29th. He told her he wanted to see the certificate and talk about the future. Believing he might finally be ready to accept responsibility, KEISHLA agreed. She called her sister immediately after to share the update. Despite the past threats and instability, she still held onto a thread of hope that he might change his mind. But Bereliz was deeply alarmed. She knew about the threats. She sensed danger. Desperate to protect her sister, she even reached out to their mother. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't convince KEISHLA to cancel the meeting. That evening, KEISHLA gathered the medical certificate and prepared to leave. She believed she was heading into a conversation about her future, about her child. But unknown to her, she was walking into a trap. Her trust in Felix, fragile as it was, still carried enough weight to override her instincts. And he knew that. That was the final cruelty. He used her love, her faith in him, to lure her into the hands of danger. The life KEISHLA had built for herself, her quiet dignity, her dreams, her compassion, stood in stark contrast to the darkness she was about to face. She wasn't just another name in a headline. She was a woman who had tried to love someone through chaos, and who ultimately paid the price for it. The heartbreak of her story doesn't just lie in what happened next, but in how many times she tried to break free, and how many times she was pulled back. This was not an impulsive act. It was calculated, cold. It was a deliberate erasure of someone who had once mattered, someone who had shared memories, dreams, and history. And yet, even in the hours leading up to the horror, KEISHLA still hoped. That hope, tragically, was the last light she carried into the night. KEISHLA arrived at the arranged meeting in her own Kia Forte, unaware of the horror that awaited her. Felix showed up in his pickup truck, where his accomplice, Luis, was hiding in the back, concealed beneath a tarp. Without hesitation, KEISHLA got into Felix's vehicle and handed him the medical documents confirming her pregnancy. Once again, he brought up the idea of terminating it. Tears streaming down her face, KEISHLA refused, standing her ground. The conversation quickly escalated into a heated argument, voices raised, emotions boiling over. Then, in a flash of brutality, Felix struck her hard in the head with his fist. She collapsed, unconscious. Before KEISHLA could regain awareness, Felix retrieved a syringe loaded with a powerful dose of illegal narcotics, which had been stashed in the glove compartment. Luis had procured the substance at Felix's request. Without hesitation, the boxer injected KEISHLA's limp body. The two men then dragged her to the back of the truck, where wire and a concrete block had already been prepared. They bound her body and secured the weight to ensure she would never surface. Covering her with a tarp to avoid detection, they set their plan into motion. Felix returned to his truck, while Luis took the wheel of KEISHLA's vehicle. Under the cover of darkness, they drove in tandem to the San Jose Lagoon Bridge, a desolate stretch that provided the concealment they needed. There, hidden from view, they carried out the final act. Despite being drugged and bound, KEISHLA was still alive when they hurled her into the water. As her body sank, the men fired a few gunshots into the lagoon, cold, calculated, final. Then, as if nothing had happened, each man drove away and returned home. The brutal act had taken mere minutes, but its repercussions would shake a city to its core. The next day, KEISHLA's co-workers grew alarmed when she failed to show up at the veterinary clinic. She had always been punctual and responsible. No one could recall her ever missing work without a warning. Their concern deepened when she didn't respond to calls. Her sister, Liz, was contacted, and after also receiving no reply, she rushed to KEISHLA's apartment. Using a spare key, she entered, only to be greeted by the haunting silence and the sight of hungry pets who hadn't been fed. Liz immediately sensed that something terrible had happened. She called their mother, who was still in Florida, and then reported KEISHLA's disappearance to the police. Liz also reached out to Felix, who claimed he had been home with his family all night and hadn't met with KEISHLA. Their mother, Kayla, flew to San Juan on the next available flight, holding on to hope. She wondered whether her daughter had been taken to a private clinic against her will, perhaps forced into a procedure she never consented to. She couldn't bear to consider the alternative. Police began by questioning neighbors and KEISHLA's co-workers, but none had seen or heard anything unusual. Meanwhile, alerts about her disappearance began spreading on social media, sparking widespread public interest and worry. When the public learned of KEISHLA's romantic involvement with a famous boxer and her pregnancy, the case exploded in the press. Journalists scrambled to speak with her family. Her relatives did not hold back. They voiced their suspicions plainly and pointed fingers at Felix. On April 30th, KEISHLA's car was found abandoned on the eastern side of the city. Her documents and personal items were still inside. The vehicle showed no signs of struggle, and investigators held on to a sliver of hope that she might still be alive. That hope was shattered the next day, May 1st. A passerby walking across the bridge over the San Jose Lagoon spotted something floating in the water, something that looked disturbingly like a human body. Authorities were notified, and soon, police retrieved the corpse of a young woman from the lagoon. Despite the visible damage caused by prolonged exposure to the water, her family was able to identify her almost immediately, thanks to a tattoo on her arm. It was KEISHLA. The city was devastated. People poured into the streets, demanding justice. The crime had shaken the community to its core. The grief was compounded by outrage. That same day, police took Felix Verdejo into custody for questioning. But he remained cold and defiant, denying any involvement. He repeated his claim that he had been home with his family the night KEISHLA disappeared. With no direct evidence yet linking him to the murder, authorities had no choice but to release him. One of the first key witnesses was his own wife. During interrogation, she admitted she had known about his long-standing affair with KEISHLA, but she had never heard of the pregnancy. Crucially, she contradicted his alibi, telling police that Felix had not been home that night. In the hours following KEISHLA's identification, her family was consumed by grief and fury. They had warned her, pleaded with her, tried to protect her. Now, all that was left were unanswered questions and a void that could never be filled. For her mother, the guilt was overwhelming. She had feared for her daughter's safety but never imagined the extent of the cruelty. The fact that KEISHLA's last moments were spent in fear and betrayal at the hands of someone she once loved made the loss even more unbearable. The city of San Juan would never forget her name. The revelation that Felix was a suspect shocked the entire island. He had once been their pride, a symbol of Puerto Rican excellence, a rising star in the world of boxing. Now he was the centerpiece of a brutal murder investigation. People who had once cheered for him from stadiums and screens watched in disbelief as the darkness of his private life unraveled. The story captured headlines not just in Puerto Rico, but around the world. How could a man so beloved by fans, so trusted by sponsors, commit an act of such chilling brutality? In the days that followed, law enforcement worked relentlessly to build their case. They scoured security footage, tracked phone records, and re-interviewed witnesses. The pressure mounted as the public clamored for accountability. Every detail that emerged pointed further toward Felix's guilt. But for the grieving family, the pain was constant. No arrest or conviction could bring KEISHLA back. Her life had been full of promise. A kind heart, a bright future, and a baby she never got to meet. Justice, they hoped, would not just be a verdict in court, but a legacy of truth that would not let her death be in vain. The investigation began swiftly and methodically. The first step authorities took was to review traffic surveillance footage along the route to the San Jose Lagoon Bridge. the final place KEISHLA Rodriguez was seen alive. That's when they discovered two vehicles of interest: Felix Verdejo's pickup truck, followed closely by KEISHLA's Kia Forte. It was immediately evident that the Kia wasn't being driven by KEISHLA. That discovery was pivotal. The very same day, investigators seized Felix's truck. Forensic examination revealed hair strands matching KEISHLA's in the vehicle bed, further evidence connecting the athlete to the brutal crime. The pressure was mounting, and it didn't take long before Luis Cudis, Felix's accomplice, surrendered to police. He offered to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. Cudis provided a detailed account of the events, identifying Felix as the mastermind behind the plan. Meanwhile, Felix remained defiant. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, he refused to cooperate, declined to answer investigators' questions, and continued to proclaim his innocence. Yet, authorities recovered a firearm from Felix's possession, the same weapon used to shoot KEISHLA as she sank into the lagoon. Although legally registered, the gun became a damning piece of evidence in a case already overflowing with proof. Phone records further sealed his fate. Data showed all three individuals, Felix, Luis, and KEISHLA, had been in the same location the night of her murder. There was no denying it now. The last goodbye came on May 8th, when KEISHLA was laid to rest in a funeral that captivated the nation. Her coffin was not transported by a traditional hearse but carried in a white horse-drawn carriage, showered with white flower petals from above. It was both a farewell and a national cry for justice. Celebrities, athletes, politicians, and activists stood together in solidarity, demanding accountability and drawing attention to the ever-growing crisis of gender-based violence. Felix Verdejo was officially charged with kidnapping, carjacking, premeditated murder, and the killing of an unborn child. These federal charges were serious enough to warrant the death penalty. Yet, from the outset, KEISHLA's family made a solemn plea to the court. Let him live, but only in the confines of a prison cell for the rest of his days. They believed life imprisonment would be a harsher and more fitting sentence, a lifetime to reflect, to suffer, and to remember. Court proceedings were delayed multiple times due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but eventually resumed virtually in the spring of 2021. The court concluded that the crime had been premeditated, orchestrated by multiple individuals, and executed with deliberate cruelty toward a pregnant woman. Luis Cudis' testimony was central to reconstructing the timeline and understanding how meticulously the crime had been planned. He admitted to supplying the drug used to sedate KEISHLA and to providing the wire and concrete block to weigh her down. Though Felix continued to deny his role, his denial stood hollow in the shadow of such detailed and corroborated evidence. Even his wife, once seen standing beside him in public, had moved swiftly to distance herself. Immediately following his arrest, Felix's wife filed for divorce. In court, she testified truthfully, confirming her knowledge of his affair, but denying any awareness of the pregnancy or involvement in the crime. She withdrew from the media storm, choosing instead to focus on raising her daughter and rebuilding her life. Reports later surfaced suggesting that Eliza Santiago had remarried. But her post-scandal life was not free from torment. She revealed in interviews that she had received numerous anonymous threats, calls and messages that wished death not only upon her, but upon her young daughter Miranda. Some people wrongly suspected her of complicity, though authorities found no evidence to support those claims. By the summer of 2023, after more than 2 years of investigations, hearings, and national uproar, the jury returned its final verdict. Both Felix Verdejo and Luis Cudis were found guilty on all charges. Their convictions were decisive, but sentencing had yet to be handed down. A final hearing was scheduled for mid-November 2023. The outcome seemed inevitable. Both men, responsible for the death of KEISHLA Rodriguez and her unborn child, would likely spend the rest of their lives in prison, without the possibility of ever tasting freedom again. What had once been a tale of athletic promise and national pride had turned into a dark, cautionary tragedy. The fall of Felix Verdejo wasn't just a personal downfall, it was a national reckoning. A reminder that talent, fame, and public image can mask deeply rooted violence and manipulation. His name, once associated with triumph, had become synonymous with betrayal, loss, and brutality. But for KEISHLA's family, no verdict could undo what had been done. Their daughter's light had been extinguished, and with it, a future full of dreams that would never come to pass. In Puerto Rico and beyond, her story sparked urgent conversations. People spoke out more openly about the warning signs of abuse, about the dangers of possessiveness masked as love. KEISHLA had tried to break free, to live on her own terms. And though she didn't survive, her voice echoed through the cries for justice that followed. Vigils were held in her memory. Laws were revisited. And in her name, new efforts were launched to protect women who find themselves in the grip of violent partners. KEISHLA's story was not forgotten. It became a call to action. As the final hearing approached, public attention again turned toward the courthouse. Would justice be served fully? Would the punishment match the cruelty of the crime? Whatever the outcome, one thing remained certain. The memory of KEISHLA Marlon Rodriguez Ortiz and the life stolen from her would remain etched in the hearts of her family, her community, and the island that mourned her. She had trusted someone with her life, and he had thrown it away. But in the end, her legacy endured. A legacy not of tragedy alone, but of courage and the unrelenting pursuit of justice.